Sean, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Pete. Thanks for having me.
Okay, last but not least, and this is one of those things where I've heard people talk about it, and I get the question a lot in the online forums and discussions. I know at trade shows people ask about this, but I've never seen a video on it, and I definitely want to show how it's done.
Okay.
But more importantly, I want people to understand which thing to use, and that's prepping your machine to move. I think a lot of people are intimidated by, okay, I'm taking my printer, I'm either moving across the house or I'm moving across the country. And they don't know which scenarios to use and what things might trigger that. So I'm gonna let you kind of go through and clarify the difference between what you need to do to move your printer across the house from one room to another, but on the same floor, from one room to another, maybe on a different floor, across town, but in a van and you have a very straight, flat surface, or across the country where you're not kind of quite sure where things are going to go. So talk to me about the different scenarios.
Sure, I mean, the printer itself, there's three different. There's move indoors, same floor. There's move indoors, different floor. And then there's move outdoors. So the biggest thing is how much ink is going to drain from the machine. So what we always tell people is that anytime this machine's going to be tipped more than around a 30-degree angle, you would want to do a move outdoors because you want to drain the entire system. Now what people don't understand is that we'll use 2 to 3 maintenance cartridges, depending on the model of printer it is, obviously, how many inks. But that's gonna be, if somebody's gotta move it, and I've seen this happen where they're like, oh, I don't need to do anything, I just need to tip it on end for 2 seconds and it'll be back down. Guess what? The printer will have problems because you're getting aqueous ink all over the printer. So it's really one of those things you have to know, if you're handling the printer, like when us at Canon do trade shows, we do move printer outdoors because we don't know what's, once it's out of our hands, we don't know if it's going to be on its side. You just never know. So it's really about how that printer is going to be moved, and as long as you can ensure that it's not going to be tipped, then moving, doing the move indoors is just fine. But once you know that machine's going to be tipped, then it needs to be, completely drained so you don't get any, ink leaking out of the reservoirs, because, there's the sub-tank reservoirs, there's ink in, obviously the lines, the print head, maintenance cartridge. So it's, again, a lot of people I've seen even moving inside, and they don't think they have to do anything because, I do have to tip it to go through a doorway, but anytime that machine tips more than that 30-degree-ish angles, it needs to be, the level, we call it the, move outdoors is like, used to be level 3 move, so.
I mean, ink is a fluid, so it's going to move. And 30 degrees is kind of that rule of, okay, this is how far you can move before it's starting to come out. And a fluid, even if it doesn't get into the electronics, which is your biggest fear, because there's all kinds of electronical boards in this that once something wet gets on them, they're done, they're gonna get fried. But even if you get lucky and that doesn't happen, you now have ink all over your platen and your printing areas. And look, it's hard to clean a machine just in general from daily use because there's lots of nooks and crannies in these things. The idea of getting ink in there and trying to get all of that out and not have ink come on the back of your prints, that's kind of a scary thing.
And even from a Canon support aspect, we don't know what kind of damage was done to that machine, so that makes it difficult on Canon too, from a servicing standpoint, if something like that was to happen.
And when we talk about 30 degrees, I mean, in my mind, if there's any doubt and I'm not sure if the difference between a 7-foot guy and a 6-foot guy carrying your printer is 30 degrees, and it's probably not, but if you're not sure, I mean, even the instance of, okay, well, I'm moving across town, I'm going to put it in the back of a box truck, but I'm walking up the ramp of the box truck. Unless I know for a fact that I'm not going to go over 30 degrees, I'm draining that, right?
Absolutely.
Now, beyond just the ink being a problem, because listen, nobody wants to waste inks, but it's not a waste if you're keeping the ink from spilling over and ruining your machine. But more importantly, you also don't want your head sliding around, right? I mean, that's on a belt. So what do we do in terms of making sure that we don't have mechanical things banging around in there?
So upon installation of the machine, there is a belt lock that is on the machine with the red tag sticking out, kind of taped to the machine, okay? And so what we do with this is hang on to it, don't throw it away. And if we do need to move the printer, You simply just snap the belts, kind of pinch them together and put them in there, and that way the whole carriage assembly can't be sliding and moving all around. So that's one thing, if you install your machine and you think, you know what, I'm gonna have to move this at some time, just keep this piece, and that's really, besides doing the move printer, this would be the only other thing that you need to do when you're moving your printer.
Yeah, I think on setup, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes I've seen people make, is that they throw that away.
Yep.
It's not that big, it doesn't take much room.
Yep.
I also see a lot of people hang on to the orange bar that goes across the print head itself, that you really don't need to keep that.
That one you don't need to keep. This is the more
just
important
that.
one. Yep.
Perfect. So let's talk about other situations where you might not need to worry about moving the printer, but just using the headlock without draining and making sure it's strapped down is okay. So if they are moving it and they can do a flat move from one room to the other, or they're going flat move into a truck, they can lift it with a lift gate, and they never have to worry about tilting it. Can they move it without draining the inks and doing a prep to move in that scenario?
They can, as long as they're 100% certain there's going to be no tilting the machine.
But they still need to do the headlock.
I would do the headlock, even if I was moving it across a building and going over some bumpy tile, and carpet can be a pain with these things, rolling on a thicker carpet. So that's just one of those things I would use just all the time.
I mean, especially if it's going in the back of a truck, if they have to jam on their brakes, all of a sudden your head goes sliding the carriage assembly hits, and all of a sudden...
The carriage assembly is not a cheap item.
No.
Nor is it an easy service repair. So we want to keep that as best locked down as we can.
Now, is there a good solution if they did accidentally throw that away to lock the belt down? Put you on the spot. Because my concern would be, and you're probably going to agree with this, if you just go grab a 99-cent clamp at Lowe's, you might pinch it too tight and cause damage.
Yeah.
So if it's me, I'm going to grab one of the 99-cent clamps from Lowe's, but I'm putting like a piece of fabric or a rag under it, wrapped around, and then that, so that the pressure's not as intense and it's taking some of that away.
Yeah, because this isn't really, this isn't a clamp. It's just the two belts,
Because the belts have teeth
together
inside.
Yep.
So what that's doing is forcing the teeth together, and it's not squeezing them together so tight that it can't move.
It's just making it so
it's just making it so those teeth that were running on the wheel now hit each other, so they can't move.
Correct.
So you don't need much tension. Mm-hmm. You can almost use like a clothespin, right?
I would say even like your desk clip, right?
So anything that's just very light tension.
It just needs to hold those two, those belts together.
So that they don't have the ability to slide anymore. Correct. It creates the friction it needs to keep that head from sliding. If you guys ever have any questions and you need more information than what we talked about today, feel free to reach out to us at 1-800-4LEXJET or lexjet.com. We're happy to help you in any way you may need.